Tonight on Reporting Scotland, emergency polling facilities open amid postal voting concerns. Edinburgh, Fife and Borders councils say that voters who haven't yet received their ballots can vote at their council facilities this weekend. For many people, it's the start of the summer holidays. We'll hear from those who have and those who haven't been able to vote.
We applied for one, we got told we were getting one, but it's not actually arrived, so.
Priority is getting on your big roller coasters.
But the postal vote's done, so we can enjoy it.
With just under a week to go till the vote, we'll have updates and analysis from the campaign trail in a special extended programme. Also tonight, a former Chief Constable says he called the force institutionally racist after hearing the evidence from the Sheku Bayo inquiry.
In sport, UEFA's top referee stands by the decision not to award a penalty to Scotland in their crucial Euros match against Hungary.
Coming up towards the end of the programme, I'll be here with a full weekend forecast.
And Glasgow bids farewell to these 44-year-old subway cars. Hello, I'm Sally Magnuson. Welcome to Friday's programme. This time next week, we'll know who's in number 10 Downing Street and who'll be sitting in the House of Commons as your elected representative. Millions will go to their polling station to make their choice. But today, in extraordinary circumstances, emergency steps have been taken in Edinburgh, the Borders and Fife to give those who are still waiting for a postal vote a chance to exercise their democratic right. Our news correspondent Jamie McIver has the story.
This is how concerned Edinburgh Council now is about delays to postal voting. A special facility for holidaymakers still waiting for their postal voting pack. They can simply turn up with ID and get a replacement pack straight away.
What we've done is set up a service here at the City Chambers on the High Street in Edinburgh for people who are concerned that because they're going away on holiday and their postal votes haven't arrived at home, in those circumstances people can come in here.
People like Jeff Harris. He flies off to Canada tomorrow morning.
I've always voted, and I was going to be away on polling day, so for the first time I had to go down this avenue to see, to get a vote.
And people like Kate Murray, heading off to Arran with her mum Claire.
I'm relieved, but it's a bit of an inconvenience still, but at least I can come in and vote, because I know people probably wouldn't be able to.
Her mum's postal vote did finally arrive through her letterbox.
And I was getting quite sort of tense as well, because I feel really angry about the date of the election.
There are calls for a full review of how the postal voting system has worked across the country.
I think some of my colleagues around the country have made it clear that it's not been an easy process. Obviously people can register to vote by post, but then we have a printing facility, there's a distribution facility, and as I said before, with the school holidays we know time is of the essence, so it's not been a straightforward process this time round.
This has been a highly unusual move by Edinburgh Council, possibly even an unprecedented one. But across Scotland, there's still concern that many people who wanted a postal vote still haven't received one.
Jamie McIver, Reporting Scotland.
With less than a week to go in the election campaign, the parties have been out and about across Scotland making their final push for votes, as our political correspondent Phil Sim reports.
After what is often felt like a divisive and pretty negative election campaign, today we went looking for a ray of sunshine. Parties are hitting the road for the final week of campaigning, and they all insist they're getting a honking great reception. So never mind the attack lines.
We've only seen self-service, sleaze, scandal after scandal.
What are the positive pitches being offered to voters?
The New Deal for working people is personal for me because I know it'll transform people's lives and give them dignity. I don't want working people having to go to food banks to feed their family. I want them to have decent, secure, well-paid jobs, and that we could have our public services back on their feet again, and we can really have that renewal that we need.
A big day for battle buses, with the SNP unveiling one of its own. And the party is proud to stand on its record in Scotland.
If you look at some of the things that the Scottish Government has done, we've doubled the provision of early learning and childcare. We make it possible for young people to go to university without paying tuition fees. We've got free prescriptions in our country. These are some of the decisions that have been made in Scotland for Scotland.
That's it.
There is one party, of course, which has had enormous fun throughout the campaign.
Well, I'm on a paddleboard. This is a positive campaign. Lib Dems are really enjoying it, and we're getting that back on the doorstep. Ed Davies had a lot of cut through. Our message of positivity about local healthcare, about schools, about getting the sewage out of our rivers is really chiming with people. So we're going to take a big leap forward in this.
The Conservative campaign has been somewhat windswept, but they too are aiming to get things looking up.
Improving and maintaining our roads network, improving the NHS, investing in more GPs, improving standards in education, improving the economy and cutting tax for Scottish workers. These are strong positive messages that resonate with people looking at the issues at the moment in Scotland.
No diesel-driven battle bus here, but the Greens also have an eye on some new wheels.
Politics is capable of better than that. You know, if you think about the generation after the Second World War who had suffered so much and they decided to rebuild a better society, a fairer or more equal society, and in that moment politics was capable of an incredible legacy.
So there might be some sunny sentiments among our politicians after all. But let's see who's still smiling in a week's time. Phil Sim, reporting Scotland.
For many in Scotland, today is the first day of the summer holidays. Hope Webb spent the morning at Glasgow Airport catching up with those who are heading off on holiday to hear how much of a factor the election has been in their thinking.
It's an early start for the Woods family. They're heading off on a family trip, travelling around Japan. But for Mum and Dad, they secured their postal votes on the day the general election was announced.
I think it was really unfair to do it during the school holidays, so I felt like I was going to get diddled in a way if I didn't get my postal vote. And so that's why we registered really quickly for it, because I did suspect, because the councils are so overworked just now, and they'll have their own people going on holiday, that we might have some issues with it. So that's why we did do it straight away, and I'm quite glad we did now, because it meant that it was a bit of peace of mind once you posted away the vote.
Meanwhile, the Rahatki family are off to California. Dad Ravi will be voting via proxy.
We'd booked our holidays 3 months ago, and there was no real option to change it. So that was the only option that we really had, either that or a postal vote. But I couldn't get a postal vote in time, so proxy voting was the only option I had.
But not everybody has been able to find a solution in time. Ian and Sue won't be voting as their postal vote didn't arrive before they left.
Did you get your postal vote sorted?
No. It came late.
It's not arrived yet.
It's not arrived yet.
Yeah, it's not arrived. So we applied for one. We got told we were getting one, but it's not actually arrived. So.
And so you went to all the effort of trying to sort it out, but it's not got here in time?
No. Yeah. So disappointed.
But with sun, sea and sand calling, some holidaymakers have more pressing matters on their mind.
Can't wait. I've got a book. I'm going to buy another book. And I'm going to switch right off.
Big priority is getting on the big roller coasters.
But the postal vote's done, so we can enjoy it.
I haven't quite yet decided who I'm going to vote for. I've still got a lot to look into, but we will decide over the weekend. Think hard and over a few Prosecco's.
The Electoral Commission says local authorities are working to get ballot forms out to postal voters as quickly as possible. They say all voting packs are expected to arrive by tomorrow. And with less than a week to go until the nation heads to the polls, the question remains as to whether we'll see a continuation or a departure from what we know now. Hope Webb, reporting Scotland.
This might also be a good time to highlight another new element of going to the polls next week for most of us, and that's the requirement to bring voter ID. So what can you take with you to vote? Here are the options: a UK passport, a UK photo card, driving licence, a blue badge, or a Scottish National Entitlement card, including a Saltire card or a Young Scot card. If you don't have valid ID, you will be turned away from the polling station next Thursday. The only exemptions are those who've registered to vote without the correct ID or who no longer look like their photo and have already applied for what's called a voter authority certificate. You can find out more information about all of this on the Electoral Commission's website. Let's go now to our chief political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes. Lindsay, postal voting very much the big story today. How unusual, how unprecedented even is this?
Sally, there have been delays to postal votes before, and it's not uncommon at this point in an election campaign for some postal voting packs to be yet to hit people's doormats. But it is the timing of this election as the school holidays start across Scotland that is creating this sense of urgency. Now, it's down to individual councils to send out postal voting packs, and several are now putting in place emergency arrangements. As you've been hearing here in Edinburgh, there's a facility where people who have not received their pack can come into the council's offices and pick one up, and that is being replicated in other councils as well, including Fife and the Borders. And the Electoral Commission says that as far as it's aware, that is an unprecedented move in Scotland.
What about the politics here, Lindsay? John Swinney is saying this could affect the result of the election.
Well, we're being told that 156,000 people applied for a postal vote between the election being announced and the deadline for doing so. And we're told that those people are most likely to be affected by any delays. We don't know how many people have not yet received their postal voting pack. And of course, it will be down to individual circumstances as to whether those people can resolve that issue and take part in next week's election. But around a third of seats in Scotland are marginal, and in some of the tightest contests, well, at the last election, fewer than 2,000 votes separated the person who won that seat and the person who came second. So, in theory, yes, this could have an impact on some seats. It's impossible to say, however, without more information, whether or not that will be the case. Now, John Swinney did say when the timing of this election was announced that it was deeply disrespectful to Scotland. I think we're going to hear more of that row over the timing as this story on postal voting develops.
Lindsay Bewes in Edinburgh, thank you very much. A former Chief Constable of Police Scotland has said revelations at the public inquiry into the death of Seiko Bayo played a major part in his decision to describe the force as institutionally racist. Sir Ian Livingstone made the statement 3 months before he stepped down last year. He's been giving evidence at the inquiry in Edinburgh today. Our Home Affairs correspondent David Cowan reports.
Sir Ian Livingstone was Police Scotland's commanding officer when this inquiry began. Today, as a civilian, he returned to explain why he'd made that damning assessment of the force he'd led for 6 years. But first, he turned to Seiko Bayo's family and paid them this tribute.
For the dignity you've shown, the courage that you've shown, and the commitment you've made to seeking truth, and it's one that I share with you.
Seiko Bayo died after being restrained on the ground following a violent confrontation with police in Kirkcaldy. Sir Ian said statements made at the inquiry by the family and by officers involved in the incident played a major part in his decision to say this.
Police Scotland is institutionally racist and discriminatory.
He said the Black Lives Matter movement had focused minds as well, as had evidence from within Police Scotland.
It was clear to us that, very clear to us, that officers and staff from minority groups were not getting the experiences and support that they deserved. The idea that prejudice and bad behaviour didn't exist is nonsense. It does exist, and we need to take robust steps to deal with it.
Sir Ian Livingstone said it was his decision to say it. He was solely accountable for it. It was a statement of reality. He argued it was a catalyst, a fundamental step towards making Police Scotland an inclusive service. Sir Ian said there was an aggressive pushback from some quarters, but he took that as proof that he'd needed to say it.
Commentators and others at times were very personally and aggressively critical about throwing officers under a bus and exposing them to danger and whatnot, which I genuinely took great exception to.
It's 9 years since Seiko Bayo died. A great many issues remain unresolved.
Officers who were involved in Hayfield Road in 2015 still have the issue of possible misconduct hanging over their heads over 9 years later, and the family still have that uncertainty.
I do think that the delay is excessive and prejudicial potentially and unsatisfactory for the family, for the officers involved and for the wider public interest. But what the resolutions for those delays is, I'm not clear in my own mind.
After Serene's departure, a survey of Police Scotland staff found that 60% of those who took part disagreed with what he'd said. David Cowan, reporting Scotland.
Some of the day's other stories now. A woman has died after being found seriously injured in a property in Glasgow. The 36-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene in Tummel Street in the city's Ridley district yesterday evening. Her death's being treated as suspicious. The 32-year-old man's been arrested in connection with an assault. A senior council architect who chased a child with a meat cleaver has been ordered to carry out community service. 57-year-old Colin Doig, who works for Aberdeen City Council, had been drinking a large amount of wine when the incident happened in Dundee. He previously admitted acting aggressively towards the teenager and assaulting a woman to her injury in November 2022. A public electric bike project has suspended its Inverness service after what's described as relentless vandalism left just 6 of its 56 bikes in the city available for use. High Bike's Fort William bikes have also been targeted, and in recent months the cost of vandalism to the scheme has run to £50,000. British Transport Police said it was investigating damage to bikes at a hub at Inverness railway station. For many women, going for a smear test can be an uncomfortable or embarrassing experience, and around a third don't do it. But now a postgraduate student has developed a non-invasive test-at-home device which detects cancer-causing HPV strains in their menstrual blood and gives a rapid result. Joanne Macaulay reports.
Women aged between 25 and 64 are invited every 5 years for a smear test to screen for cervical cancer, and this has cut the rate of the disease. But the process can be uncomfortable, and after her first one, Sanziana Foya wanted to create a new method of screening.
Talking to other women, I realized it's actually quite a shared, unpleasant experience, and since I was already doing a PhD in bioengineering and I was developing biosensors, I thought maybe there's a way to do this in a way that is non-invasive, that women can have control over themselves, and also this hasn't been innovated in decades, so it seemed like a good place to start.
So she invented Pap Cup, a device the size of a fist which carries a biosensor. A sample of menstrual blood is added to the top and the biosensor reads it. After about 15 minutes, a result is ready. It's past the feasibility stage and a prototype is being developed. Sanziana is doing her PhD at Imperial College London, but she gets help from a business support organisation at Edinburgh University.
We're plugging the gap that helps PhD students, academic staff and researchers who have an idea or an innovation to take that, start a company with it and have impact in the real world. So we're open now for applications, in particular for those that have those technology-driven solutions, to any university across the UK.
Cancer Research Horizons is the commercial arm of the charity and has also been involved in the project.
So we know 1 in 2 people will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their lives, and if we can detect cancer earlier using novel health technologies, novel inventions that are turned into the clinic from laboratories to the bedside, then we will save so many lives.
So this is the first device that aims to provide a virtually instant test, because everything else takes days or weeks to come back as a result. So we're using a very different technology.
NHS data shows around a third of women miss their smear tests, but Sanziana hopes her invention will make screening a more comfortable and convenient option. Joanne Macaulay, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
As we've been saying, it's the start of the summer holidays for many of us, which might mean a trip to the coast or a beauty spot. But would you know what to do if you got into trouble in the water? The RNLI is reminding people as part of its latest safety awareness campaign, as Louise Cowie's been finding out.
The RNLI rescue a man and his dog caught out by rising tides in the Firth of Clyde.
You managed to lift up?
Volunteer lifeboat crews at 46 stations around Scotland launched more than 1,200 times last year. With the school holidays upon us, the charity is launching its summer safety campaign.
Okay, so lie back with your head submerged in the water and the ears submerged. Then just control your breathing.
In 2022, unfortunately, we lost 226 people across the UK through drowning. So every year we try to have a campaign to prevent those fatalities. This year we've been concentrating on Float to Live. When you fall into water, your breathing becomes rapid, your heartbeat becomes rapid, and you lose your ability to be able to swim. By getting onto their back, what happens is their heart rate calms down, their breathing calms down, and mentally they're able to prepare to start shouting for help.
40% of those who died in accidental drownings actually had no intentions of entering the water. Some slipped in while out walking, others were caught out by the tide, and others were swept away by the waves. So would you know what to do if you found yourself in trouble in the water?
I'm not too sure what I'd do in that situation. Probably try and tread water or just swim.
I put on my back and swim, and I got it from my coach in swimming lessons.
So it depends on the difficulty, but if I was like just struggling, generally it would just be float, make a star shape
Yes.
and float. Yeah, which Tom's been learning in his swimming lessons, haven't you, Tom?
I think I would go starfish and float, not use up a load of energy. I think that's what I would do.
I've no idea.
You don't even go in the water.
I don't like the water.
56 million people are expected to visit the UK coast this summer. If you're one of them, the RNLI want you to keep the words float to live at the forefront of your mind. Louise Cowie, reporting Scotland, Dundee.
Let's get tonight's sport now with Amy, and it's back to that penalty again. Oh, we should say possible penalty.
Yes, we're still not over it, Sally, almost a week on. Thanks very much. Good evening. It was indeed one of the big talking points from Scotland's final game at this year's Euros. Should this tackle on Stuart Armstrong have seen Scotland awarded a penalty?
The attacker of Scotland, Armstrong, was in front of Hungarian. If you watch from the behind camera, there was a movement of the attacker.
Tennis and Andy Murray will play Tomáš Mahač from the Czech Republic in the first round of Wimbledon if the Scot recovers in time from back surgery. The two-time champion had a procedure to remove a cyst last weekend and says he will leave it to the last minute to decide whether he's fit enough to take to the court. It's more likely that Murray will team up with his brother Jamie in the doubles. Meanwhile, Scottish wildcard Jacob Burnley could play Novak Djokovic if he wins his first round match against Spanish qualifier Alejandro Moracanas.
Obviously excited to play. Firstly, whoever I got, I was going to be excited and pumped to play. But yeah, obviously it's a good draw to get first round, and definitely got a chance. So yeah, I'm just gonna put my game out on the court, and hopefully I can come out with a win, or hopefully just have a good match anyway.
Rangers' new signing Conor Barron says he will ignore any criticism he receives from Aberdeen fans after signing for the Ibrox club on a 4-year contract. Barron left Pittodrie when his contract ended, but the move has angered many Aberdeen supporters given the long-standing rivalry between the clubs. The 21-year-old has thanked Aberdeen for helping him to develop and insists his move to last season's Premiership runners-up is right for his career.
Yeah, it doesn't get to me, not at all. Doesn't get to me. When you're at the size of a club like Rangers, that can't get into your head. If it does, then there's a problem. As a player, you've got to do things for yourself sometimes, and you've got to do what's best for your career at the right time. I pay my thanks to Aberdeen. They've obviously brought me up from a boy into the player I am today, so I thank them for everything that they've done to help me get here in my career. But as I say, it's the next chapter of my career now is Rangers Football Club, and can't wait to get going.
Jim Goodwin says Dundee United can push for the top 6 while remaining realistic about their ambitions in the Premiership. After winning the Championship last season, United are stepping up their preparations for life back in the top division this time around. Goodwin has already made 6 summer signings and hopes to add further depth to his squad. And while survival is the initial aim, they have taken hope from the top half achievements, including those of their city rivals last season.
I want the supporters to be optimistic and be excited about the season ahead, but you know, I want them to be realistic as well. And I think our main objective initially is, as you said, to get enough points on the board to ensure that this time next season Dundee United is a Scottish Premiership club. But you know, we have got inside ambitions, and you know, we believe in the squad that we're putting together. We look at the likes of Dundee, Kilmarnock, St Mirren last season, and you know, take a bit of hope from that, I think, as well.
Yeah, 3 city derbies to look forward to in the Premiership next season, Sally.
Great stuff. You going to stay awake next Thursday night? Do you normally do that?
I'm going to try.
Are you?
Probably lots of sweets required and some power naps in between, but I'll certainly be trying to stay awake all night.
Well, we'll see how you get on. Yes, less than a week away from the election. One thing is for certain, next Thursday into Friday, and that's rolling overnight coverage telling the story of the results coming in. You can see this also means lots of work taking place here at BBC Scotland headquarters as our entire building is transformed to tell that story. Martin Geisler and Kirsty Wark are going to be fronting our overnight coverage. Here they are with more details.
Next Thursday on Election 2024 Scotland, we'll bring you every result through the night from across the country as it happens.
With all our guests from right across the political spectrum, we'll be exploring what the results mean for you and your community as the story unfolds.
Join us next Thursday at 9:55 on BBC One Scotland and iPlayer.
Not to be missed. Now, this election is significant for a number of reasons, including an alteration in the political map of the country. The number of MPs elected in Scotland is changing too. We're going from 59 to 57 this election due to the changing population of Scotland. This is how things looked after the last general election in 2019. And this is how the constituencies are being drawn up, this time with 2 fewer seats than before. One has gone in Glasgow and another from the Highlands and Moray. So the results of the last vote are not directly comparable to this one. But the boffins have, of course, crunched the numbers to give us what are being called notional seats. So that's how the results from last time would look if they had been fought on the current 57 seats. Now, one of the key themes of the election here is the contest between the SNP and Labour. Our political correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart has been to Paisley, which straddles 2 constituencies where this will be played out.
Just 20 minutes from Glasgow, Paisley is steeped in its own radical history. In the early 1800s, workers here were demanding reform, but there's been more recent political upheaval.
Traditionally, areas like Paisley used to vote Labour. It was almost a given. But then in 2015, something changed, and this happened.
I declare that Mary Black is duly elected as the member.
A little-known 20-year-old, Mary Black, unseated Labour's shadow Foreign Secretary, a seismic moment symbolising a fundamental shift in Scottish politics. But a seat like this is, all of a sudden, back in play for Labour. Few people know Paisley like historical tour guide David Roy. He's even got a Paisley pattern tattoo.
It's always been, with the industry around about it, a heavy union town, whereas Labour was their main support up to 2015, when there was a huge ground shift from Labour to the SNP.
David's deeply proud of his town, but acknowledges things have to change.
The use of food banks in this area has rocketed in the last few years. Food banks became under so much pressure they were getting wiped out in a day.
Investment, David insists, is what's needed. Next stop, the West End Community Centre for lunch with some of Paisley's older residents, where even the entertainment is topical.
Banks, politicians, they haven't made a hit. They're ruining this country. I made just a bit.
Over a bowl of soup, Betty McCormack tells me about a recent trip to A&E.
I was in there at 8 o'clock, got an x-ray. I didn't go home till 5:30 in the morning before I saw a doctor. All these hours sitting in a corridor.
So you were taken in at 8 and you didn't get seen till 5 in the morning?
I didn't go home till 5 in the morning.
Right. Is there any confidence politicians can bring about change?
The only time you ever see them is when there's an election.
That's right.
They're not particularly interested. They get to Westminster and then they do the thing down there. But we never see them again.
This seat is realistically going to go SNP or Labour, but there's little enthusiasm on show for either.
SNP have been in about 14 years. I don't see much change in 14 years.
Now we've got Sir Keir Starmer. How can you have a Labour leader that's a Sir? I don't care. I can't get that. I can't understand that.
Back in the town centre, I bump into Lucas. This will be the first election he's eligible to vote in. He's just back from a trip to see the band Metallica in Copenhagen with a souvenir keyring. He felt things just worked better in Denmark.
Everyone was really happy. They had different ways of getting around. Like obviously we have buses, right? But they had this thing called the Metro, which was just a train that didn't have a driver, and it just went round really quick.
He doesn't feel like any party is speaking to him.
I think they're trying to appeal more to the people of their ages, so like your 50s, your 60s.
So you're not hearing any policies that you think, oh great, as an 18-year-old, that will change my life?
No.
This seat is like dozens across the central belt of Scotland, where Labour and the SNP will slug it out. Candidates are trying to convince voters that they can bring about fundamental change. That's a message that's proving hard to sell to Paisley buddies. David Wallace-Lockhart, reporting Scotland, Paisley.
David, as you said, reporting from Paisley there, which is split between two constituencies. There's Paisley and Renfrewshire North, which covers the likes of Renfrew, Erskine and Bridge of Weir. The list of all candidates standing there is on your screen now. And there's also Paisley and Renfrewshire South, which covers the bulk of Paisley, Johnson and Kilbarchan. Here are all the candidates standing there too. A database of the candidates standing in every constituency in the UK can be accessed on the BBC website. Now, one of the indicators, an important indicator of how people are feeling around the election is polling. The adage, of course, is that the only poll that matters is on election day, which is true, of course. Polling is not an exact science. It can be wrong, and there is a margin of error. With all that in mind, let's look at the trends in the Scottish polls that have been conducted in recent months. In March to April of this year, opinion polls asking Scots how they would vote in a Westminster election suggested that the SNP and Labour were pretty much neck and neck. Then there was upheaval for the SNP, with Humza Yousaf ending the agreement his party had with the Greens in government in Holyrood, followed by his eventual resignation to be replaced by John Swinney. Over this period, Labour overtook the SNP in the polls. Then, on a wet Wednesday afternoon in May, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called a general election for next Thursday, the 4th of July. Since then, the polls have suggested a similar picture, with Labour ahead of the SNP and the Conservatives a long way behind in Scotland. All of these numbers have been crunched by What Scotland Thinks, a not-for-profit, non-partisan social research organisation. The man behind it is Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University and famously polling guru. Good evening to you, Sir John.
Good evening to you, Sally.
The big theme, as we've been seeing, is SNP and Labour fighting it out. What are the polls telling us about that contest?
Well, the truth is the polls suggest that there's not been much in the way of dramatic movement, as you've quite rightly pointed out. Unfortunately for the SNP, Humza Yousaf's attempt to move the Greens out of government and the subsequent fallout from that did result in the SNP losing ground and falling behind Labour in vote intentions for the first time. So as a result, John Swinney, who thought he was on a gentle path towards retirement, has not only suddenly found himself catapulted into the role of First Minister, but also having to fight a difficult general election campaign for his party. I think he can claim to have steadied the ship. Support for the SNP has certainly not gone down during this election campaign, but so far the polls suggest that Labour is still around 3 points ahead. And the problem for the SNP, of course, is that Labour's support is essentially concentrated in the central belt and the west of Scotland, and that's where it's getting most of the bulk of its votes. The SNP, in contrast, its vote much more evenly spread across Scotland as a whole. So even if Labour are only 2 or 3 points ahead, they are likely to be well ahead in terms of seats won because of that different geographical pattern of support.
What's the impact of reform, UK and Scotland, who of course are in the news today with controversy over the language of their campaigners in Clacton. Scottish Tories have been warning that a vote for reform is essentially a vote for the SNP from their point of view, which is a sort of mirror image of what's being said south of the border.
Well, answer to it, not to be ignored, potentially important, though certainly nothing on the scale south of the border. So on average south of the border at the moment, Reform are running at about 17%. In Scotland, probably 6-7%. Not all the polls actually have measured Reform separately. But it's certainly interesting that the one thing that's happened to the larger parties in Scotland is that support for the Conservatives has fallen back during the campaign. The last half dozen polls had them at about 14%, whereas when they started the campaign, they were closer to 16 or 17. And it is probably the case, given that most of the people who are voting Reform are hitherto Conservative voters, that Reform are also doing some damage to Conservatives north of the border. And indeed, if the polls are right, there is a risk that the Conservative Party will record its lowest share of the vote in any Westminster election ever. Of course, the crucial thing will be what happens in the 6 seats the party is trying to defend, which of course is against the SNP. And the potential saving grace for the Conservatives is however much the vote they're going down, it looks as though the SNP's vote, at least Scotland in general, is also going down just as much, which means therefore what happens in the northeast and the borders is frankly quite difficult to tell.
John, how does this election compare so far, I suppose we have to say, with the others that you have observed over the years, the many others? I just wonder how you would define the particular flavour of this one.
Well, I mean, I think if we're talking about across the UK as a whole, I mean, clearly the one that is closest to it is 1997, when the Labour Party won a large majority off the back of a government, one of whose difficulties was it presided over a market crisis, that is Black Wednesday. We now have another Conservative government, having been in office for a rather long period of time, which has presided over a market crisis and, of course, also ethical doubts about another Prime Minister, viz. Boris Johnson. And frankly, it's just struggling, and it's been persistently struggling to escape from that legacy, just as John Major struggled back in 1997. The potential difference, but we'll have to wait and see in a week's time, it's possible the Conservatives will get an even bigger thrashing this time around across the UK as a whole than was the case back in 1997.
John Curtis, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Now, another seasoned election veteran is our political editor, Glenn Campbell, who hasn't been charging around the country quite as much this time round as he'd like to have been. I asked him earlier whether observing the campaigns, mainly from home, had given him a slightly different perspective.
Well, it's certainly more relaxing covering an election campaign from your sofa, but I don't think I'd like to get used to that. I quite like chasing politicians around the country.
It has been a very different kind of election in Scotland as compared with England and the rest of the UK.
Well, it always is to some extent. Holyrood politicians front Westminster campaigns. There's also, of course, the involvement of the SNP, which has been so dominant in our politics for such a long time. That creates a different dynamic. But in the way that has meant independence has been a strong feature in many recent campaigns, I think this one is different because my sense is the independence question is not a defining issue this time around. You don't see the Conservatives paying for billboards of John Swinney with a little Keir Starmer in his pocket. So it's different in that sense too.
So what is your sense of the whole campaign from your sofa? Although I know you've been busy with your contacts as ever. How do you see it having developed over the 5 weeks?
Well, it isn't a campaign that's about whether blue walls are going to turn red. The story in Scotland, or the primary story in Scotland, is about the SNP's yellow wall, which has been so strong, particularly across the central belt of Scotland, and whether or to what extent it can withstand a number of key pressures. The sense of frustration that some voters have with the party's record in office at Holyrood, the loss, the departure of the SNP's most successful electorally successful leader, Nicola Sturgeon, the ongoing questions about the party's finances linked to that continuing police investigation. And I think the SNP know that whilst their newest leader, John Swinney, has managed to stabilise things in his first weeks in charge, they are facing their toughest election since at least 2010, which was the last time Labour won a national election in Scotland under Gordon Brown.
If Keir Starmer does reach Downing Street, has to grapple inevitably with very tough economic circumstances, I wonder how you feel that might affect Scottish Labour going forward.
Well, I think Scottish Labour need to keep their feet on the ground, and they're telling themselves that as well, because as one campaigner put it, having knocked doors in this election, it felt like bathing in warm water with bubbles by contrast with the previous sense of rejection. But another said that it wasn't, they felt, that the public were regaining enthusiasm for Labour, but instead that at this election, some people felt Labour offered a better route to change than the alternatives. And if they do win power, they're going to inherit a very difficult economic situation. They're going to have to make some really difficult decisions. And that means that quite quickly they could become unpopular. And of course, the next election that they'll face is a Holyrood contest in a couple of years' time.
And a brief word on the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. The Conservatives in Scotland haven't really had their troubles to seek this time round, and there's also been the addition of Reform UK.
Yeah, well, the Conservatives, I think, started this election when Rishi Sunak announced it in the rain, and to be honest, things have poured down ever since. There was the apology from Rishi Sunak for leaving the D-Day commemorations early. There's the investigation into betting. And of course, the Scottish Party leader announced his resignation early in this campaign. And I think the sense of confidence they had at the start that they might do better than their counterparts elsewhere in the UK has dimmed somewhat. They're obviously fighting very hard, but perhaps not just as confident as they were at the start. The Liberal Democrats, I think, feel that they're holding their own in this campaign, but it's always a struggle for them to achieve prominence when they are a smaller party. But the smaller party you mentioned, Reform UK, might be putting the Conservatives under some pressure in seats where there's a close battle with the SNP. The SNP too might lose some support to other independent supporting parties like the Greens and ALPA.
Glenn, it's been lovely to talk to you again. Great to have your insights. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I should just say that earlier we mentioned that Bridge of Weir was in the Paisley and Renfrewshire North constituency. In fact, it's in the Inverclyde and Renfrewshire West constituency. Sorry about that. Now, tonight's main news again. Edinburgh, Borders and Fife councils say that voters who haven't yet received their ballots can vote at their council facilities this weekend. And Glasgow bids farewell to these 44-year-old subway cars. As millions of us head to the local polling station on Thursday, what is the process like for a blind voter? Work's been underway for years to make the experience better, but election bodies and charities are warning that training for polling staff is patchy. They're concerned it's putting blind people off voting. Ian Hamilton has more.
And when you say red, everybody say red? Red! It makes me know where everybody else is in the circles.
Samantha Goff is a blind professional athlete from Midlothian.
Everybody you got your blindfold on? You got the ball, you passing it?
She's at Cowdenbeath Primary School in Fife, showing the children what it's like to be a blind footballer.
Keep dribbling, keep dribbling.
The 4th of July will be her first time voting for a Westminster election.
Here's your ball, here's your ball.
Although there are measures in place to help her make her mark, she still lacks confidence that the system will assist her properly while in the polling station.
And do you want to dribble back to your friend? When I've went to go and vote previously, I've been given these braille cards tactile boxes for me to tick. but the lack of awareness of sighted guides is definitely not there. It is a scary process to vote, especially when you're blind.
This is a voting template that was first invented or designed in 1999, but it wasn't introduced into the 2001 general election. It's fairly straightforward. This is a template, it's put onto the ballot sheet. I would then fill down either tactile numbers or braille, fill the number I'm looking for, make my mark, take the sheet off the back, and then put it straight in the ballot box. Good. On you go. I'm heading to the offices of the Electoral Commission in Edinburgh. They are aware of a number of issues, so have published new guidelines to support disabled voters.
We still, every time there is an election, hear really frustrating accounts from individual disabled voters where they've turned up to a polling station and actually all the accessibility equipment has been there, but the staff don't know how to use it. It's really important that the returning officers make sure that all of their staff are adequately trained.
I've got macular degeneration, so I struggle with my central vision.
Callum Lancashire is visually impaired. He works for the charity Sight Scotland.
It can be a really intense and quite upsetting time because there is a lot of pressure around voting sometimes, and I think that if you're not being supported or being empowered to vote, it can really put you off and then build that barrier for people to actually go out and vote.
Over your head! Just because we have a disability doesn't mean we're not able to participate. I definitely think, if we have the opportunity to go in like everybody else does, why shouldn't we not have that opportunity?
Now, since the election was called in May, we've been getting around Scotland to hear what matters most to people when it comes to casting their vote at the ballot box. Here's a look back at what we've heard during our Your Voice, Your Vote series.
Agriculture plays a big role in Orkney's economy, and at the moment we don't have any certainty for any kind of support.
Having investment in things that draws people into your towns, I think, is really important. There's a real sense of community in Broughty Ferry.
Cruise liners comes in and what have they got to offer in Greenock? Absolutely nothing.
From a local business, we would just really love to see a bit of time and effort put into making town centres like ours thrive.
Cost of living crisis now, gas bills, electricity, so ultimately I think that's the biggest issue for most people at the moment.
I used to spend about £40 and that would do me 2 weeks. I'm now spending 3 times that and it's doing me a week.
Potholes. It should be number one in the whole election.
Increased storm damage are a really serious issue for coastal communities.
Oil and gas is a big employer in the North East, and particularly Peterhead, the fishing industry as well. And we've got to make sure that whoever is coming in after the 4th of July, that they're going to look after those industries.
It's very difficult as a blind, deaf person to know who to vote for. Polling stations, how do you vote, how do you get there, how do you get home, just basic stuff.
It's been very hard to have any faith in any of the politicians of any party.
A lot of our votes seem like they don't really count, so definitely a big issue for me would be introducing a more proportional system.
Young people feel like they can't get onto the ladder to find a house, especially if they're returning from university. Why should they come back to Shetland?
There's nothing here in Leven for the young folk getting jobs, not even the shops now.
Social care is going to be huge. We're all getting older, living longer, and I think we need to put a lot more money into that.
I wouldn't know really now where to vote, quite honestly. To me, they're all the same.
Well, it's the end of the line in Glasgow for the city's old subway trains. After 44 years in service, the last car of its kind ran on the underground loop today. It's all moving on with a new fleet taking over. For our reporter Aileen Clark, it was a case of all aboard the Clockwork Orange.
Quite the commotion for historic locomotion at Govan subway station, and this is what they were waiting on, one of the last original trains from when it reopened in 1980, on its last few runs.
They've got camshaft control, if you know what that is, and you get these like clicks, hisses and pops
They've got a very special sound.
Yes, they've got very special sounds.
What's special about them?
Just the bumps going on the tracks and stuff, and the noise and just the atmosphere on it.
So I used to come around with my gran, so yes.
So it reminds you of days out with your gran?
Yes, it does.
They've always been a part of my childhood, and it's really sad to see them go.
And the occasion not lost on this driver. She's been driving these trains for 35 years and proud to do so. Are we lump in your throat today?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Actually, yeah. That's. I just hope I don't cry. And I'm serious. I have got a timetable to keep to.
Better let you go then, Julie. We're jumping on, so don't go without us. There's no doubt there is a distinct shugle and sound to these old subway trains.
Good memories, yeah. Bit of character in Glasgow. The clockwork horns.
I think it's quite exciting. It's a lot of nostalgia for me. I remember coming on like with my uncle, and then I'm doing the same with my niece as well. So just thought it was good to give her one last shot on it. And it just reminds me of being a student as well.
Now, of course, we got used to really having to shout on these trains if you wanted to have a conversation on the way into your shopping or whatever. On the new trains, I'm told, you won't have to do that shouting quite so much. The aspiration is that the new trains brought in will, in a few years' time, after some serious infrastructure work, become driverless, giving Glasgow the first driverless underground service in the UK. But these last runs were all about nostalgia and that raucous rattle across the tracks. Aileen Clark, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
And now, in some trepidation, we go to Judith for the weather.
Well, at least the shower clouds there, some sunshine coming through, as you can see in that picture. At least we had lovely shades of grey there, Sally. It is settling down for the weekend, I'm glad to say. The majestic Thistle there rising up behind me, sent in by one of our lovely trusty weather watchers earlier on today. So the low pressure that's brought all the windy conditions to showers this week, well, that's finally filling in. Here it is, here to the north of us, and moving away as we head through this evening and tonight. And a quiet picture over the weekend with a brief ridge of high pressure. There'll be some ifs and buts, but generally it's dry. This weather front here bringing some rain for the start of July, but it does move through, then something drier for Tuesday. As far as this evening's concerned, some brighter sunny spells to end the day through central and southern parts. Holding on to more in the way of cloud with quite a brisk wind here, still pushing in some showers across northern Scotland. The winds start to ease elsewhere. We might just see a wee bit of cloud fringing into the Solway and border area for a time tonight. A cool night though, even cold through parts of the east. We could see 3 or 4 Celsius with shelter from that wind. Into tomorrow, it's a cool, fresh start. Any early cloud in the south will move away. Lots of dry weather and some bright and sunny spells. A wee bit of rain just pushing it across the far north and the northern Alps. That breaks up into showers by the time we reach the afternoon. In fact, it's a breezy afternoon across the northern Alps, fairly cloudy. Caught up in that breeze will be a number of showers pushing through. They'll be light. They'll push through fairly quickly. Similarly for Caithness. Some early brightness during the afternoon for the northeast before it clouds over. Further south though, some sunny spells for Fife, for Edinburgh, the Lothians, the borders as well. Some brighter sunny spells for the southwest. I think maybe a bit more in the cloud coming and going at times. 16, 17 Celsius with lighter winds. Some scattered showers up the west coast, most concentrated over the northwest Highlands where it will stay windy. So, talking of windy, if you're thinking of heading to the hills tomorrow, well, actually, on balance, a lot of dry weather across the ranges. Some blustery showers for northwestern ranges and also the Coolands as well, reducing visibility here at times, but other than that, visibility will be good. Strong winds over the tops, and this will make it feel even colder. Significant wind chill as well, considering the time of year, and high UV levels. So that's something not to forget if you're out and about in the hills, because it is obviously the end, it is still summer. Surprisingly so. As far as the rest of the day is concerned, cloud increasing through central parts, limiting the sunshine to the south. Overnight cloudy in the north. The winds veer into the northwest, pushing in 1 or 2 showers for western and northern parts. First thing on Sunday I should say, very little changes. Some early sunshine in the south, cloud increasing all the while, some breaks in at a time, a scattering of showers for the west and for the north. That's your forecast.
Thanks very much indeed, Judith. A quick reminder of tonight's main news. Edinburgh, Borders and Fife councils say that voters who haven't yet received their ballots can vote at their council facilities this weekend. And that's it for this extended edition of Reporting Scotland. Graham Stewart will be here with your late news at around 10:30 tonight. But until then, from everyone in the team, do enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.